Okay, thank you, Marcus. Does everyone know what just happened with we actually had a real tech problem? Okay, so I've been sitting over there, if you haven't noticed, just making a few edits to my Keynote on my iPad. And I walked up here and transferred from my iPad to my Mac, which I have done many times, and my Keynote would not open. And my good friend Eric Dreyer, who's been here before, had this happen to him in Sweden, and he lost everything. And I lost everything. And then our lovely friend Tanya, am I saying your name correctly? Tanya, was able to salvage the files for me at the last minute. But what you're about to see is a hodgepodge of a Keynote that I recovered from my last successful backup, which appears to have been prior to me leaving the States, and some screen grabs that Tanya was able to salvage. And I tried to reorder them. So basically, you're going to see a little bit of a talk that I intended. You're going to see a little bit of behind the scenes that I didn't intend. And we're going to tie it all together and hopefully make it work. So thank you very much, first of all, for having me back. I appreciate that. And I wanted to open up with a quick slide about Chicago and ask how many people know where Chicago is, even though I've already pinpointed it here on this slide. Okay. A lot of people outside of Chicago think it's just somewhere in the middle of the United States, which is somewhat accurate. It's up near Lake Michigan. And traveling here is always confusing because we left on the 22nd, we arrived on the 24th. The 23rd never existed for us, which is a bizarre concept. We had to go, my wife and I, who's in the back, Christine is in the back, we had to go through San Francisco. We almost missed our transfer, which was bad. And then we arrived here, and then later we're going on to Perth on Saturday. Christine's mother is originally from Perth. That's another reason why I love coming here. And let's get started. Before I get started, this is one of the slides that was recovered. You can see the high definition there. So when I talk to people at home and I say I'm going to Australia, I don't know if you're aware of this, but Australia has done an amazing job of convincing the rest of the world that you're always warm and always sunny and always a beautiful place to visit, because that's the impression that everyone gets. And then I tell them, well, you know, it is winter there. And they say, what? Australia has winter? Like, there's a foreign concept to them. Everyone says it's on their bucket list that they would want to eventually come here, although a lot of Americans are afraid of the flight. And then lastly, some believe it doesn't exist, and I'll get to that later. When I talk to people here about Chicago, they say, well, it's somewhere in the middle and it's cold. And it can be cold. In fact, I wanted to share this. This is a photo, and this is a high-res photo, of a view from our office in the middle of winter, looking out the window. And that is ice on the inside of the window. And that was unusual. That was the polar vortex that swept through. And that was, I had the number up here, and I think I am going to get it right. That was negative 30 degrees Celsius that night. And actually, I would normally say that was very cold, but I actually spent a colder night in northern Minnesota. This is a photo of my son in northern Minnesota. And this is during the day, so it's probably around 0 degrees. But at night, it got to negative 36 degrees Celsius. And that's the coldest I've ever been, and I never want to do it again, and I almost cried. But you can see ice on his eyelashes. That's how cold. Just from walking around, the breathing will rise and freeze to your face. So why are we here? Tech problems are communication problems. Even though I had a very serious tech problem, we know those exist. I really believe this because I've been in the business for 20 years, and most of the problems I've encountered, conflict with my customers, has not really been because of a tech problem. It's been because expectations were not set correctly. It's because somebody didn't understand what the goal was. It's because we didn't listen, or we didn't communicate, or they didn't communicate, or vice versa. And so I'm trying to get much better at communicating, because the tech, I don't want to say it's easy, but the tech is something we can all continue to learn, talk to each other. In some cases, it's like following a recipe. And to me, it's very much more black and white. But people are very difficult. People are very complex, and communication is hard. So I try to get better about that. Here's a slide that I threw out, and I was just going to talk about how we missed the 4th of July, or we will miss the 4th of July, which is a big thing in the United States. And I love this photo. These are photos I took, by the way, photo of Bondi Beach. Okay, so why are we here? There are 3 reasons why we might be here. We might be here because we want to get out of work, or get away from paper clips. I couldn't find something to represent work. I was trying to keep to the Keynote icons. And then we might also be here to meet people and talk to people. And somehow I created this strange, I don't know, it looks like a swingers group at the toilet or something. But a group of people. And we might be here to learn, right? And I think we're all here to learn. And that's what we're here to do. And that's hopefully what we've all gotten out of this week. The question is, or rather, learning is often about access to information. And I think about this in terms of when I was a kid going to university. That was really, at the time, pre-internet, the only way to really get information was to go to the library, go to school, go to a conference like this if you had the ability. But today, are we really lacking information, access to information? I mean, we have so much information. In fact, has anyone here heard of the knowledge doubling curve? It's one of the many theories floating out there around how fast we're now learning. And the theory goes that up until the 1900s, it took 100 years for mankind to double their knowledge. By the 1950s, it only took 25 years to double our knowledge. And by 2000, every year, we were doubling our knowledge. Today, the theory is that we are doubling our knowledge every single day, which is hard to believe, because obviously I'm not doubling my knowledge every single day, and many of us, that's just impossible. But it does explain some things, which is this thing called VUCA, or V-U-C-A. I don't know if you've heard of it. I just learned about it. Other than, what's the other one? FUD, fear, uncertainty, doubt. This just seemed to resonate with me a little more so with all this knowledge being thrown at us. We almost have to decide what we don't want to pay attention to more so than what we want to seek out. But this rapid change introduces complexity. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. And when you have that every single day, that creates a system that is difficult to keep up with and difficult for you to often communicate with your customers because, and I've got to warn you, the next slide is something, ironically, that I was working on, and I don't know if you recognize this guy at the bottom here. Maybe it was an omen that I stuck him in my keynote. Thank you, Eric. Eric Dreyer was here last year, right? Yeah, okay. So just think about all the information you've learned just this week. Our brains are probably feeling a little overstuffed right now. We can't take it all in. How do we take it in? And more importantly, how do we communicate that to our clients? How do we become super communicators? And that is what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about how everyone in this room can leave here being a super communicator, or at least having some ideas about how you can become a super communicator, because this does take practice. I'm still practicing. So let's talk about why this matters. Why do we care? And there are two sides of this. We could adapt and do amazing things and attend more conferences and get promotions and all that stuff, or we could do nothing. And talk about losing a job because you become irrelevant. If human knowledge is becoming double every single day, then things are changing very quickly. So we need to keep up. And I would say everyone is here because they want to keep up. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. And as I say there, you might be sitting on the internet, becoming an internet troll. So we have two options. We either do nothing or adapt. And once again, you're going to see old slides, new slides. So some of this is a little convoluted, but I'm going to flip through these. I love that movie. Tell them they're dreaming. Okay, and this is the slide I was looking for. And one other quick story. I had started off with this meme I created of Eric Dreyer and his brain, sending information out to the cosmos. And then I adapted it to this because I thought, well, I don't know, maybe Eric won't think that's funny like I do. So I adapted it, took his head out, and then when we were here, my wife wanted to go to breakfast, and she chose a place called Brainwave Cafe. And we went to Brainwave Cafe, and without knowing it, I accidentally barged into the X-World Women's Breakfast, which I was trying to avoid because I didn't feel it was appropriate for me to be there. But I accidentally showed up there because my wife chose the place. Tanya was there. She said hello, thank you. And then I noticed that the Brainwave logo is very similar to this. So I don't know what cosmic relationship I have with this Brainwave Cafe, but if you check it out, the logo is a brain with glasses and a mustache. Weird. Okay, so we have to think about our audience when we're communicating. And the reason I believe that is because we all have a different method of learning. And that method of learning may not be the way I learn, may not be the same as the way Marcus learns. And I don't have all my animations working, but and I thought Duncan might be here. And honestly, I don't know if he's ever said she's a bloody ripper, or it just sounds like something he might say. And I did Google this to make sure it was okay. It sounds kind of like maybe it's not okay to say, but it's a good thing to say, right? Okay. So when Duncan talks, and he's a great talker, and he knows a lot, he's very intelligent, but I can't keep up with him. Half of what he says, I'm like, yeah, I'll listen to that later, I'll watch it again, maybe I'll read the transcript, maybe I'll talk to him over lunch, but it takes me a long time to really understand what Duncan's talking about. And that's probably because I'm not as fast of a learner as Duncan. I learn in a different way. And the three ways that I'm most familiar with are visual, which I think I'm more of a visual learner, oral or audio, and physical, actually doing something, which also I like to physically do something to learn it. But in my research, I learned that there are a few more. There's logical, verbal, social, and I got a little confused between verbal, which I guess is reading in this case, and oral, which is more music related. And then I found there are even two more, intrapersonal and naturalistic. And I'm not 100% sure about the naturalistic, but the intrapersonal is learning alone. And I think we all might sometimes want to do that, but obviously here we're learning as a group. So the reason for this message is that why does IT often believe that a single email or a single ticket is enough to convey the message, right? If we all learn differently, it's not enough. We have to think of other ways to communicate that message. Another thing to consider is timing, because we all learn at different times, meaning a good example of this, I feel, is if you've ever watched a movie and you got something out of it, and then 10 years later you watch the same movie and you got something completely different out of it. So we, as a group, at least my team, often will say, oh, I've told the client, several times, and they just won't listen. Well, maybe it wasn't the right time for the client. Maybe the client had other more pressing issues. Maybe the issue that we brought to them didn't resonate with them. Maybe it didn't make sense. Maybe we didn't say it in the right way. Maybe it just wasn't the right time. And that's also a good reminder of why we should not ever stop messaging. Another example is I've heard my team say, oh yeah, client A, they should do this, but they'll never do it, so I didn't even mention it. And And I'm like, wait. You've got to continue to mention it, because I've run into issues where we've stopped mentioning it, we've stopped talking about upgrades, we've stopped talking about investing, and then what happens? One day, it resonates with the client, they see that they're behind, and they look at me and they say, why didn't you tell me this? It's like, well, I told you 2 years ago, you didn't listen, so I stopped. That's not a good answer. So we got to keep messaging. This is a little embarrassing because I was going to kill this slide, but this is a photo of me before and after I joined the Boy Scouts. I was trying to communicate how to turn yourself into a super communicator, but and then I had a slide. I also threw this one out, just the lost in translation. We all know about that. I also discovered that in Australia, what we call the telephone game is called Chinese Whispers, and I'm pretty sure Chinese Whispers is derogatory in some way, so I was afraid to say that, but apparently it's still a thing here, right? Okay. So the telephone game, we all know what that's like, and that's pretty straightforward. I actually cut this stuff out of the presentation. So what I want to focus on is, didn't I say that? Probably not, which means, have you ever said something to your spouse or your wife, friend, whatever, and they don't really take your advice, and then it feels like within minutes they're talking to someone completely different who says the exact same thing, and they're like, oh yeah, good idea, I'll do that. And you're like, I just said that. But did you really say that? Was it the right timing? Was it the right tone? Was it the right presentation? Were they ready to listen? Maybe not. So I want to talk about a few communication examples, and because my wife's here, hello wife, Christine, disclaimer, I have changed the names, the situations, the stories to protect the innocent. But my wife and I learned about something called sympathy or solve. Has anyone heard of this? So sympathy or solve is the idea that, and I'll tie this all back into how it relates to tech, but is the idea that if I start complaining about something, and you give me a solution, a solve to that, maybe I don't want a solution. I just want to complain about it. I know how I should have handled it. I know how I should have done it. I know what I could have done, but I just want to complain about it, and I just want you to listen to me long enough and maybe even agree with me, and then later we can talk about a potential solution. And this is how a lot of spouses can have conflicts. So we learned that when something comes up, you ask, do you want sympathy or solve? Because I have a solution I'd love to give you, but if you don't want to hear that, then that's fine. So sympathy or solve. And when I was researching this, I came across this funny post online that was an article. So this guy said, or guy, maybe it was a gal, I don't know. I am confused by people who come to me with their problems and want my sympathy rather than my solutions. My solutions are usually pretty spot on if they'd employ them. And I love this response. What's it like only being half alive? Okay, so communication examples 2A and 2B, because they're very similar. First one, and I don't think I have my my builds right now, so I'm going to prep it and then I'll show you the slide. But my wife works at a university, probably like this, and do you guys have deans at the university? Okay, so the dean, who's kind of in charge of if students cause trouble, he needs to talk to a student. So one of the deans where my wife works called a student in and said, do you know why I called you in? And he said, I was smoking pot in my dorm room. And the dean said, no, but thanks, I'll add that to the list. So yeah, and then maybe the student said the F word. So the other story is a friend of mine, his son, when he was very little in grade school, came home and said, Dad's like, how was school today? And the son says, well, Katie said the C word. Katie said, and my friend said the actual C word. And his son said, No, she said crap. What does the C word mean? So that brings me to a little side discussion about the words, I call them. The F word, the N word, and the C word. And I'm going to be very careful about this, but the F word has obviously grown in popularity over the years. When I was a kid, we never said it. If you said it, you got in big trouble. I think I heard my dad say it for the first time in high school and was shocked. But now that's clearly on the rise. The N word is something I would never say, we never say at home, never say anywhere, never, 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 never. But I've heard it, I heard it in the Brain Cafe over the radio station, or the Brain Cafe, was it? Yeah, Brainwave Cafe. I was in Vegas, I heard it when I was driving in a car. In all cases, there are scenarios where people don't, I don't know if they speak very good English or they just don't listen, but that's a word totally avoid. And just to set the stage, the C word is also a word in the United States that we totally avoid. I will not say it here. This is being recorded. I would be banned from talking at any other conference. But I did some research on the Australian sayings, and you guys say the C word a lot. The top 100, 16, 9, 8, 5, 4, 2, and 4 being the highest compliment you can pay an Aussie includes the C word. So, of course, my response is, and that is when I went into this rabbit hole of the internet. And I learned that there's a conspiracy theory, a real one, suggesting that Australia, a very real and legitimate country with a population of 24.4 million people, is not real. Quote, Australia does not exist. All things you call proof are actually well-fabricated lies and documents made by the leading governments of the world. Your Australian friends, they're all actors. And computer-generated personas, part of the plot to trick the world. I mean, I should have known. A name like Duncan McCracken and Ransom, I mean, yeah, these are clearly actors fooling me. I don't know where I am. I mean, I was on a flight for 26 hours or so I could be anywhere in the world. But so just one more thing. I had to verify this thing about the words. And, oh, this one I didn't quite fuzz out, but slides. Okay. I'm doomed. I'm doomed. So the F word is on the rise. I verified that. This is from Google. And the C word actually has risen as well, but not nearly as much. And if we go in closely, which, like I said, unfortunately, okay, well, the point I was trying to make here, and my slides went awry, is that dot represents where the United States is, British English. American English. The British English, I couldn't find Australian only on Google, is higher. And if you look really closely, I have this great slide where you zoom in and you see that you guys are just keep going up and we're going down. And maybe you can explain that to me later. Communication example number 3. This one's pretty basic, but something that we probably all have run into occasionally is, and I'm killing it with the lack of builds, but we had a client, I'm going to go to the next one. We had a client who was moving. And because they're moving, of course, they started packing things up, and we disconnected stuff for them, and all's good. And then they called like hours later and said, we need to print. And my team, who got the call, said, well, your printer's boxed up. You can't print right now. Could you just wait? And they're like, no, we really have to print. We really have to print. And they ended up calling me only because they knew I just talked to the client and they were about to dispatch someone, but they're like, well, I don't know, Ben was just talking to them. Why would he let them box up a printer and now they're trying to print? So they called me and I agreed. That didn't make any sense. So I called the client and I said, why are you trying to print? And they said, well, we need to fax. And I was like, what? Like, why do you need to fax? Well, I didn't even know they were still faxing. They said, well, we have to get this one invoice out, and we normally put them in the mail, but they need it today, so we need to fax it to them. And I said, well, can you just create a PDF and send it to them? No. The application we use doesn't allow us to make a PDF. And we know they're on the Mac, right? We know every application that can print can create a PDF. But it was kind of both embarrassing and an eye-opener to me that, wow, we never sat down with the client and said, by the way, are you still faxing? and why? So we were able to walk them through how to make a PDF and how to email that and how to get their invoice out, and they were content with that. But this was 2018, and they were a long-time client, and they still are, but it was really shocking. So that brings me to the question of asking why and the power of asking why. And I'm going to leave this and do a video. And this is, for those of you that were in my talk yesterday, this is the same video. And despite what you may think about Louis C.K., yeah, he's not a nice guy. Forget it. He's doing some bad acting here as well. But this demonstrates, I think, the power of why, and then we'll talk about exactly what that means.
Papa, can we play outside?
No,
Why?
because it's 5 o'clock in the morning. It's too early.
Why?
The sun hasn't come up yet.
Why?
Because the sun comes up later.
Why?
Well, the Earth goes around, and when it turns a certain amount, the sun shows on the horizon.
Why?
I don't know.
Why? Why don't you know, Papa?
Because I didn't pay attention in school, okay? I didn't listen in class.
Why?
Because I was high all the time. I smoked too much pot.
Why?
I didn't think it would matter.
Why?
I just figured my life would come together on its own. But then I met your mom, and you came along. So now I work at the muffler shop.
Why?
Well, it's too late for me to pursue a career now, and since your mom has a job with benefits, I stay home and I take care of you, because what I make is pretty much just a joke.
Why?
Well, the service economy replaced manufacturing. There's no real jobs in America anymore.
Why?
We had good jobs for a while, but it's just because we were lucky, and now we're unlucky.
Why?
It's just the way it goes.
Why?
Because God is dead and we're alone.
Okay.
So the reason I showed that video is the power of why and the ability to ask questions, right? And we talked about this yesterday for those of you that were in the Talking Cybersecurity. Obviously, we don't want to ask questions like the child did in that video. That would be annoying and just would never work. But there are definitely cases where I see it in myself, I see it in my team, where we need to get better at asking why and asking more questions to dive deeper into what the real problem is. And last time I was here in 2017, I mentioned something called the something paradox. It It was the idea that smart people can be pretty dumb sometimes. And have you guys heard of that? Do you remember that? So I found this other idea called the dummy curve. And the dummy curve, actually, I learned it from Sandler Training. And Sandler Training is a sales course that I started taking so I could learn to be a better salesperson, better communicator. And they actually do have Sandler Training here. There's a Sandler trainer here in Sydney by the name of Rebecca. I can't remember her last name, but if you Google Sandler Training, she'll come up. And I do recommend the course because they go into deep, deep detail about how to ask questions and how to get better at it. But one of the things they talked about is the dummy curve. And what this means is when you're new and starting out or learning something or learning to be a consultant or whatever, is you're kind of dumb, and therefore you have to ask a lot of questions. And what ends up happening is you listen more than you talk. But as you get smarter and more confident and you think you know where, I've seen this before, you start to take shortcuts, you start to make assumptions, you start to talk more, listen less, ask fewer questions. And what happens is you become essentially an amateur. Because the pros, the ones who do it really well, they act dumb sometimes. Even if they think they know the answer. They will stop and make sure. They will ask questions. They will ask clarifying questions. They will ask maybe more questions than you might feel comfortable today asking. So I believe if you resist the urge to give a solution immediately and ask just a few more questions, then you're going to get better information and be better able to solve the right problem. In fact, here are 3 really good reasons for dummying up, following the dummy curve. It defends, if you're a consultant, first of all, it defends against unpaid consulting, which is nice, right? You don't want to just jump to a solution, especially if you don't fully understand it and then not get paid for it. You want to gather information, and more importantly, you want to gather information to deal with the correct issues. And I see it all the time with my team where they don't, because they're young, maybe they're at the amateur curve and they need to learn to get better. They don't ask the right questions, so we do something that doesn't really benefit the client, or it's a quick fix, it's not a long-term fix, or we just outright do the wrong thing. It's like, why are we doing that? Sometimes you have to ask those questions. And of course, if we go back to those real-life scenarios, if the student had said no, rather than, that's a bizarre one because why would he volunteer that information, right? Well, here's why he volunteered the information, because we're so ingrained to just answer questions without asking why we're answering those questions. Or rather, when people ask us questions, we feel like we should answer them. And sometimes a client will ask you to do something, and you'll want to say, yes, I can do that, but maybe you should say yes, and can I ask you a few more questions about why you want to do that before you just do it. So some dummy phrases. Yeah, some of these slides are duplicates, so I'm going to skip through here. I'm going to skip. Let's see. Okay, yeah. So these are, well, that might have been one I was going to leave in. Resist the urge to give a solution. As you can see, it's basically just trying to get some more information out of the client, because oftentimes the client doesn't know what they need either, right? They just think, well, I need to print, because they don't know that they could really be creating a PDF. And if you're still not, I'm not going to explain this because that's a whole different story that I don't think we need to go into. But if you still don't believe me, think about the last time you went to a doctor. And if you walk into the doctor's office and you said, my arm hurts, and he said, take these pills, how satisfied would you feel about the service that doctor's giving you? Wait a minute, he just gave me some pills, and he doesn't really understand why my arm hurts, right? So doctors, good doctors, they ask questions. The what, the when, what's it called? the interview questions or the newspaper questions, like how, what, when, where, why, all that stuff. In the States, they might ask, if we have insurance or not. To be fair, the doctors don't ask that, but the receptionist does. And so what you want to do is think of yourself as that doctor asking those questions rather than just saying, here, take these pills. I think it worked for my other clients. It'll work for you. Right? And also, at this point, I transition into making recommendations on tips for asking questions. And the Sandler training, they have entire workshops, day-long workshops on just asking questions. So obviously we don't have time for that. But some tips, one tip is ask permission. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions? You know, that right there sets the client at ease, gives them a heads up, rather than you just blurting out, boom, 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 why? Okay, yeah, here, ask permission, and then soften your questions. You know, if you think someone might have spilled liquids on their notebook, you know, you don't just blurt out, "Did you spill wine on your keyboard?" Because they're probably going to get defensive. So you might want to soften it, lead up to it. You know, how long has this been happening? Can you give me some more details? Any chance it might have been dropped? Maybe your kid dropped it. You know, maybe liquid damage, possibly. You know, and I don't know about you all, but I've had clients where they're adamant, no liquid damage, and I've even said, you know, just between you and me, this is a safe place. When we send this into Apple, they're going to know whether it has liquid damage. There's an indicator in there, and it's going to be pretty clear. So, you think there's a possibility, maybe there's liquid in there? And they're like, maybe. You know, so sometimes you have to build that trust with the client rather than just blurt it out. And then I talked a little bit about this, ask additional clarifying questions. And one of my favorites is, you know, when do you need this, or if I got this to you, you know, next week, would that work for you? Because what I see a lot is the sense of urgency that really doesn't need to be there. Like, we have some clients who act like, this has got to be done yesterday, And we say, well, what if we got it to you in 2 days? Would that work? Or what's the trigger? Why do you need it yesterday? And sometimes there's a legitimate reason why they needed it yesterday, even if it's poor planning on their part. But asking those questions and clarifying it means that you don't have to go rearranging your schedule for something that really isn't that important. And I want to talk about beware. This sounds really easy, sounds really basic. It was hard for me. And this is kind of what people go through when they try this. At first, they're like, yeah, I don't really do that. This isn't going to help me. And then as you go out into the world, you're like, oh, yeah, wow, I guess maybe I do that. And then for me, it was like, okay, well, next time I get the opportunity, I'm going to ask more questions. And then after the meeting, I walk out, and I was like, damn it, I didn't ask enough questions. I really don't know. I need to go back. And it's okay to go back and ask questions, but this is how hard it was for me. And really, it's because it's a habit. It's because we're just voluntarily in the habit of not doing this. So rather than jumping to solve, ask better questions, practice it. And the key takeaways I want everyone to keep in mind is your clients learn differently than you. Timing is critical, so don't give up. Learn to ask better questions, get the permission, soften the questions, and practice. And I guarantee you, you will become a super communicator. And there he is in his full glory. Eric Dreyer, thank you very much. And thank you all for listening. Thank you all for being patient with my slides. I don't know if you're aware, but I rely heavily on my slides to trigger what I'm supposed to talk about. And I did not have that trigger. And I had it in a kind of random order. So hopefully it made sense. Hopefully it worked for you. Hopefully you'll let me at least come back and visit this made-up, make-believe country in the future, wherever it is. And thank you very much. Are there any questions?
How could I convince people in our organization that, to that exact point, that a single email about a major change in, say, I don't know, Adobe licensing is not enough. That there needs to be more done.
Yeah, I just had this conversation with one of our clients who is in the ad business, and I said to them, they're an advertising agency, I said, would you ever recommend that your clients just do one ad? And they're like, yeah, what do you mean? Like, no, like we create campaigns. I said, you got to think of this messaging, if it's important enough. Obviously, not every message is that important. But if it's important enough, you have to think of it as a campaign, an ongoing campaign. And maybe you start with an email, maybe you mention it during a team meeting, maybe you have posters in the break room. You know, everyone's different, everyone has a different culture, and I guarantee you, even if you do all those things, you'll still have people that just miss the message, right? We know that. But at least we tried, and we tried a lot harder and better than just that one email that's really easy to miss. So I don't know if that helps or answers your question, but I would keep trying and exploring and asking. What we did find in this discussion with this client is they had a whole little group of people who work on messaging internally, and they just never considered IT needing messaging. And I think that's where we're all at right now. Like, we haven't really considered that IT needs messaging. I think more than ever, as we try to get people involved in IT, in self-service, in DEP or unboxing, you know, they've got to be involved. And we talked about this yesterday during the cybersecurity workshop, is unfortunately IT has created a long history of not communicating and not even allowing that communication. And they've built this culture of, you just use your device and we'll take care of everything. And that's no longer possible. That tidal wave of information that we're all receiving, we all need to work together. We're all in this together, and we need to communicate together. I'll step down from my soapbox now. But yes.
Any more questions?
With all the different mediums that you can communicate with people around, there's sort of you know, you have like an email which might sort of go through some sort of formal process to make sure you get the right message, and then you've got things like Slack and things like that. Which particular medium have you sort of found is sort of most effective, sort of as an overall kind of thing? That sort of casual sort of, hey, by the way, we're doing this, and come chat to us whenever, or the formal sort of like, we'll just push out this formal communication and go with that.
Well, once again, what we've been trying to do is talk to our clients about what their communication methods are and their culture is. I mean, internally for our own team, we do use Slack, although we've also tried Teams, had a bit of a rebellion using Teams. Every time, we've tried it twice now, and most recently we tried it for 2 weeks, and as soon as I came to Australia, my team went back to Slack. So almost had them. So my point being that I will post something in Slack as a quick, FYI. But if it's really important, then I will also send an email to the team, because we have a team email, because I know people miss things on Slack. And then if it's really important, obviously I would direct message them or pick up the phone or mention it during the meeting, which is then recorded and then shared. So even for ourselves, we're trying to get better at, if it's important enough, communicating it multiple ways over multiple channels. And that is hard because we're not an ad agency. We don't really set up. We're not really set up for that. And we're often remote, right? And all of us are often traveling and working. We're not all in the office. It's not as easy to get everyone together for a team meeting and just say, hey, we all got this, good, let's go.